everybody. Thank you for coming. I'm Tom Chang. I am Polly's son. I'm not going to stand here and try to describe what a kind, compassionate, generous, and loving person my mom was. Chances are that if she's touched your lives at all, you already know this about her. Instead, I'm going to talk about a few flashes from my memory that have always stood out and might help you understand why I've never been prouder to consider myself a mama's boy in every sense of the word. One of my earliest memories from childhood was a trip that my parents had taken when I was around 5 years old. My dad had received an award from his company, IBM, and they sent my parents on a week-long trip to Puerto Rico. They left us with our wonderful live-in nanny, who always took excellent care of us. But I struggled. Each day, I missed my mom more and more. On the day that they were scheduled to come home, I made my nanny promise to wake me up, even though they weren't coming home until late that night. Around midnight that night, my mom came in to wake me up, and I leapt out of bed and hugged her as hard as I could. To this day, I've never felt as happy to see someone as I did that night. My mom was a terrible driver. She had a lead foot, complete disregard for traffic lanes. She was even worse at parking. She couldn't parallel park in a space that was twice the size of her car. As if that wasn't bad enough, she always had a scalding hot cup of coffee next to her that was filled all the way to the brim. Growing up, I spent a lot of time next to her in the front seat. In those days, there were no child car seats or airbags. So instead, my mom used her arm to hold me back. Whenever there was an abrupt stop or a break, and this happened a lot, I'd be sitting there, and all of a sudden I'd fly forward in my seat, only to have her hand slap me in my chest and push me back down into my chair. It seemed pretty ridiculous to think that that was actually going to keep me safe in the event of a big accident, but somehow it did. It made me feel very safe, and she did it every time without fail. My mom was very protective of both my sister and I. Those who met her might say that she was somewhat quiet and kept to herself, but in reality, my mom was a fierce advocate for those she loved, and she wouldn't stand for anyone who intentionally or unintentionally mistreated them. One time we were visiting a family friend, and I was sent off to play with the other kids in the house. This was a new group of kids to me, and I hadn't quite adjusted, and they weren't really including me in any of their games. My mom noticed this, and she went up to the kid whose house we were in and asked him what games he had that I could play with. He said he had a video game that was old and stored away somewhere in the garage, hard to get to. My mom marched him to the garage, stood there as he dug up all the parts of his ColecoVision and set it up for me. I had a great time the rest of the night playing video games with the other kids. Her protective instincts didn't end at her own kids. One time we were hosting a family at our house for a few weeks. The family had a young boy that was pretty close to my age. Although the boy was well behaved, we began to notice that his mom would routinely hit him and spank him pretty hard in front of me and my sister. I'm not saying that my sister and I weren't spanked. We were, when we misbehaved, but this was another level of discipline, and we were pretty unprepared for it. Apparently so was my mom, because one day she took the woman to another room and had a private conversation with her. From that day on, I didn't witness another incident while they were staying at our house. After they left, I asked my mom what she said, and she told me that her rules were that as long as they were staying at our house, she would not allow that type of punishment. At that moment, she might have well been wearing a cape because she was a superhero in my eyes. In my adult life, my mom has continued to have a strong influence on our family. She was the rock of the family, and she kept us all grounded. Her personality traits can be seen in each of us. My dad shares her strong faith and stubborn disposition. My sister carries on her independent spirit and her talents as a gracious host. And as for me, I've always tried to follow my mom's example by being open and friendly when meeting new people, but like my mom, I'm really just an introvert with a small circle of good friends. There are no words to describe how deeply my mom will be missed. There's an empty void in our lives and hearts that will never be filled. It makes me incredibly sad that my boys and my nephews will grow up knowing my mom only through their memories and the stories that we share with them. But if there's one thing that she taught me over the past 40 years, it's that we don't run and hide from difficult times. We face our challenges head on. We persevere through whatever comes our way. This is how she lived her life, and she'd want us to do the same. I love you, Mom.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. My mom was the heart of my heart. Someone once said, "Nothing compares to losing a mother, especially when she has always been there for you." This summarizes for me and our family our wrenching loss and explains the many-layered, aching hole in my heart. My mom was and remains my confidant, my greatest cheerleader, and my role model for what it is to be a dedicated working mom. There are many, many examples of how she has always been there for me and our family, and Tom just told you a few. My mom was an elementary and middle school librarian when we were growing up, and this not only meant that we had wonderful summers together, it meant she was home by 4 every day. Usually with a big pile of books in the backseat of her blue Datsun. I would race out to the driveway to meet her and see what adventure or tale she brought home for us that night. My mom was a great storyteller, and I still recall sitting at the dinner table, hearing about Rumpelstiltskin spinning straw into gold, or about the emperor who had no clothes. She would patiently tell us the most fantastical stories until our dinner was all gone. And believe me, it had to be all gone. My mom instilled in me a love of books and reading that calms and sustains me to this day. And it did so for her as well. In the last week we were together, Tom and Dad and Uncle Peter and I were so happy when Mom would call out, "Yanjing," which is Chinese for glasses, followed by "baozi," or newspaper. Of course, it was not really possible for her to read, but she loved her routine, and we were so grateful and glad to help her maintain her routine to the end. Another fond memory of my mom, an example of how much she did for the family, was during the mid-1980s, when my dad went to work in Hong Kong for 2 years. It must have been so tough to raise 2 kids alone, working long days and weekends, running a demanding small business. And to top it off, I was an unruly teenager who desperately wanted my independence. As a sophomore, I begged my mom to teach me to drive, although she was working incredibly hard each day and had mixed feelings about giving me the keys. She found the time to take me out in the Chevy Chevette. And as you heard from Tom, this explains a lot about my driving skills. As my mom and I are both pretty much awful drivers. I know I pushed the limit with my teenage ways, and looking back, I wonder if she gave me room to grow because she, too, had yearned for her freedom, wishing from a young age to go to college, and then off to faraway America to fulfill her dreams. Now as a mom myself, I can understand and admire all the more the challenges that she and many of the aunties of her generation who are here tonight, today with us, what you all faced, coming to this country with no relatives and little help, raising a family with strong values, but sometimes caught between 2 cultures. The sacrifices she made for us are now fully apparent, and Tom and I couldn't be more grateful. I hope that I can be half the mom that she was for us. She and my dad taught us to work hard, to value community, and to make the best of our God-given talents. Failure wasn't the worst outcome. but failure to try hard and to do our best was. In the end, we found her illness very hard to bear. In the end, we found her illness very hard to bear, as she had just retired from AT&T and faced grueling treatment, just as I gave birth to our second son, Lucas, in 2009. But she fought on bravely, and not only provided sanctuary to me and Jeff every weekend, where we could take much-needed naps and showers and eat delicious hot meals. But she considered herself doubly blessed to also see the birth of Max and Oliver, and to provide the same support to Tom and Marina. For a while, Mom was healthy, and during this time, she enjoyed the simple pleasures of life, eating a nice, big, juicy hamburger, watching Judge Judy, taking walks with Dad around the neighborhood, and playing with the kids. Indeed, my mom and dad were incredibly busy, meeting with church friends several times a week, participating in their mahjong and karaoke clubs, and traveling to new and exciting places like Antarctica. There were times we couldn't get on her calendar for weeks. Couldn't get on there. Well, she lived a full and happy life, and we lost her way too early. But I know we will meet again. And until then, I know that she is caring for us still, just as lovingly from heaven as she did here on earth. Love you, Mom.
Chinese, that is always the way I communicate with Polly. 今天我们聚在这儿，向我们的好朋友品正告别。品正愿你一路好走，到一个无忧无虑、没有病痛的世界。缘起1969年，我和崇宇刚结婚，来到纽约上州 East Fishkill， 那儿有 IBM 的大本营。那个时候呢，我们都是一群刚离开学校，学业有成，准备来到那儿安居乐业，生儿育女。每个周末，我们总是聚在一起，几乎是每个周末聚在一起打桥牌、下围棋、玩麻将、学做菜、谈儿女经。那是一段很美好的时光。品正台大外文系毕业以后，他到美国获得了一个图书管理的硕士。之后呢，他的第一个工作就是小学学校的图书管理员。因为工作的方便，刚刚 Kitty 也讲了，他每天4点就可以到家。到家的时候呢，总是带着大袋的书给他们2个孩子看，回头看看今天他们一双好儿女有这么好的成就，都是在品正一手呵护下成长的。4个孙子更是品正的宝贝。在病中，他曾跟我提起，他真舍不得这4个可爱的宝贝，但是他没有太多的力气可以多多照顾他们。品正爱他的家人，照顾裘伯母，一直到裘伯母在湾区几年前去世。品正的唯一的弟弟叫敏正，他们的感情也非常好。敏正今天没有办法来，但是他在姐姐走的那天清晨，是随侍在姐姐的旁边。至于微春，更是他终身的伙伴。那么品正总是体贴支持张微春一路走来，无怨无悔。在微春的职业生涯中，品正总是尽力的支持 后来他离开了他热爱的图书馆工作，也是因为跟着微春举家西迁。那么这期间，品正也经历了不同的工作行业，也是为帮忙微春分担家计。我们认识都快半个世纪了，我们有过异地而居的时候，但是总是见面不断。每次我们有机会来到湾区，品正不管多忙，一定要安排我们见面，或者是安排跟其他的老友见面。我们的一家人曾经从东部玩到圣河西，还曾经住过他们圣河西的家。那时候孩子们还小，都可以玩到一块儿。从不能接受癌症的侵袭，到勉强自己打起精神来过日子，品正总是勇敢地跟病魔对抗。那么跟我们相聚的时候，他总是藏起对病痛的恐惧，不愿意影响到别人的好心情。当第二次病发的时候，品正勇敢地再一次接受治疗，为的是让他的家人安心，也希望能够换取一点多的时间，可以跟他的家人在一起。今年5月，他们一家祖孙3代都去了一趟欧洲之旅。我也很为他们高兴，他们有这一趟的全家相聚的时候。品正带着不舍，但却是没有遗憾走了。走前的1周，天理跟汤米轮流24小时日夜陪伴着他们的妈妈，情景动人。品正，我们会永远思念你，谢谢。